Concept and scope of what a video game is has changed rapidly in the last 50 years. These changes have come with many positive and negatives, so I decided to go over 5 things I love about modern video games. If you haven't seen it already, I also uploaded 5 negatives, so check that out, but this video is all about the good. The first positive I have for modern gaming may trigger you, so hear me out. I generally like that studios today continue to support their games with DLC and updates. Now, up front, yes, it sucks when studios rely on them to essentially give them more time to complete their unfinished mess, looking at you, Cyberpunk, but I feel the benefits outweigh the cons. And it doesn't hurt that we live in an age where if a game is released as a buggy disaster, you'll be the first to hear about it. At its best, I feel free updates are a great way for developers to implement small but meaningful improvements to an experience. This allows for developers to invest resources in things they'll know for sure the players want. This also extends to paid DLC as well. And again, yes, in its worst iterations, leaving out content at launch to fill up a DLC expansion pack later can be frustrating, but I also think it's worth pointing out that in many of these instances, if a game didn't have a post-launch roadmap, this wouldn't necessarily result in the base game having all this missing content that wasn't included, but rather in many cases it just wouldn't have anything extra. Paid DLC costs money because it takes additional time and resources to create, and so the publishers and the studios are banking on the fact that people will buy it. Now, ultimately the value of every product is going to vary, and so it comes down to the consumer to reject or support what they're willing to pay and not pay. So that's its own conversation. But as a whole, I enjoy having reasons to come back to games I love. I'm really enjoying Ghost of Yotei Legends, and it has me tempted to rebeat the main game on New Game Plus, while I'm also excited for the large DLC pack coming to Dragon Ball Sparking Zero later this year. Both games I really enjoyed at launch, and I'm happy to get more content for. Lastly, I also wanted to point out how many DLCs today fill the gaps of old school sequels. So take Dragon Ball as an example, like we just mentioned. Budokai, Tenkaichi 1, 2, and 3 all came out within 3 years, but the jumps between them in content feel more comparable to a DLC pack today versus a proper sequel. There are definitely plenty of examples of games that show the positives and negatives of the DLC model, but I feel as a whole, it's been a net positive to my experience as a gamer today. The second aspect of modern gaming which I really appreciate is good online multiplayer. In my complaints video, I discussed how much I hate games requiring a constant internet connection, and that's definitely still true, but when it is time to play a game online with friends or strangers, the connection quality today is actually good. Not every game released today has a perfect implementation of online multiplayer, but many of the worst examples today are still leagues above some of the examples of the past. Growing up in the 2000s with access to a PS1, an Xbox, GameCube, DS, and Wii, I never had a quality online internet experience with any of those consoles. I didn't have the fastest internet, and in no world would I have ever been allowed to route an Ethernet across the house into a console, but even with a perfect setup, many of the experiences were subpar at best. I have very specific memories of playing Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 online with it running at like 2 frames per second on the Wii, and even on the much more powerful PS3, Tekken 6 would still run like ass online. Over the next few years, I started to see more games run decently well online, but funny enough, the first game with any real intensity that I was impressed by was Mario Kart 8 on the Wii U. It was the first game I'd play online frequently that just worked, at least most of the time. I've talked to some friends who look back at the mid-2000s fondly for online multiplayer, but that definitely was not my experience, and it wasn't really fully realized until last console generation, where I feel the promise of online gaming was finally fulfilled, at least for a casual connection. Let me know if I'm alone on this, or when you finally had a great online multiplayer experience for the first time. The third aspect of modern gaming I'm loving is the rise of indies. Independent games and developers aren't a new thing, but we've reached this point in tech and tools that even small studios can make games of larger scopes. Historically speaking, there has always been awesome indies, but often with these smaller experiences, you would have to calibrate your expectations going in. Not as much today. It's easy to complete an epic experience and not even realize how small the team was until you roll credits. To be clear, in many modern indie titles, you can still feel some of the restraints of a smaller team and budget, but with the tools of today, the gap has been shrunk significantly. I don't want to get bogged down in trying to define what makes an indie, since that's a whole video in its own right, but I'm happy to see many smaller teams with relatively smaller budgets being able to punch far above their weight class. Last year in particular, half of the main Game of the Year nominees came from humble little teams who were able to pull off some unique and polished experiences. I'm just as much of a sucker for a good cozy sequel to an awesome AAA game, but indies are so important in pushing innovation and keeping the industry healthy. The day we stop getting great indies is the day I think we should all seriously be worried about the long-term viability of the games industry. The idea of accessibility isn't new, with difficulty options having been around throughout most of gaming history, but in recent years many games have more accessibility options than ever. In the broad sense, the word accessibility is often used to describe extra options designed and included for people of various disabilities and limitations, and in that sense, from an outsider's perspective, it would seem we've made a ton of progress with lots of room to still improve. But beyond targeted options for people with specific roadblocks from playing games, there's just so many more options in general, which is great for everybody. It's more common than ever to see graphical settings for console releases, or for games to include very specific gameplay settings to customize the experience. At the worst of times, having graphical settings for a console game can feel overwhelming, with maybe none of them feeling ideal. But like anything surrounding games as a whole, it's all about implementation. For certain titles, I value frame rate above all, while for others, the pace and art direction of a game may have me opting for the best quality image available. One of my favorite new options that's become more popular is a balanced 40 FPS mode, which seems to be the perfect sweet spot for a lot of games. Graphical options are not a new concept to PC players, and difficulty settings aren't new either, but the level of game customization has really leveled up across the board. There are a lot of small but meaningful options that really improve the player experience, like optional center dots, contrast and brightness options, speed settings, aspect ratios, in-game options, controller remapping, and probably one of my favorites, difficulty customization. I've seen this in a few games, mostly PlayStation first-party titles, but I've really been enjoying the option to customize specific aspects of a game's challenge. Ghost of Yotei is the best example that comes to mind, where you can individually adjust enemy aggression, timing windows, enemy damage, and stealth detection. For me, I like the challenge of lethal of most of these settings, but then for timing windows, I bring that down to hard and maybe even medium for stealth. For me, this feels like the perfect sweet spot, but everyone's going to be varied, and so that's why it's great to have these options. In general, more options are good for more players. The final thing I love about modern gaming is another broad one, and that's speed and ease of playing games. The speed in which we can start and stop games at a moment's notice today, a lot of people take for granted, but I'm still amazed by. Go back far enough and many games adapted the arcade approach of making you start over from square one after dying. Fast forward a bit and the ability to save progress became standard, but even then, when and where you could save wasn't always a given. I'm sure I wasn't alone in being stuck in a game but having to go to bed against my will. I'd sneakily leave on the PS1 all night so I could pick it up right where I left off in the morning, just to discover the next day my family had turned it off, because apparently it wastes a bunch of power leaving it on all night, or at least that's what I was told. Nowadays, it's easier than ever to save at a moment's notice, with many games having autosave, do all the work for you automatically. Funny enough, I think because of my early days gaming, I still religiously manually save games, just out of fear. Let me know if this applies to you too, or if I'm just weird. Perhaps almost as game-changing as save points that I am still grateful for is rest mode. I remember first getting my PS4 and thinking how mind-blowing it was I could just put the console in and out of rest mode without even having to worry about saving. Unless the power goes out, of course, but this most recent console generation also introduced SSDs and Xbox Quick Resume. While not applicable to every title, most games on Xbox can be resumed exactly where you left off within just a matter of a few seconds, even if the last time you played it was several game sessions ago. even without quick resume on PS5 and Switch 2, load times are so minimal and save points are so abundant, it's not even as big of a deal as it should be. Speaking of SSDs, I feel compared to many gamers, I wasn't nearly as bothered by long load times as some, but I also can't deny that the lightning fast read and write speeds of today are an improvement in every way. So from better save points to the inclusion of rest modes to the speed of data, it's significantly easier than ever to jump in and play a video game today compared to 30, 20, and even just 10 years ago. So those are my 5 positives. What are your thoughts on the list, or my more negatively focused one? As I mentioned earlier, if you haven't already checked it out, see my reverse list of 5 things I hate about modern gaming. As always, I appreciate you for watching, and until next time, see ya.